In the winter of 1850, in a remote hillside home overlooking the valley of Clermont-Ferrand, something unimaginable happened behind stone walls and shuttered windows. A mother began dreaming of her children's deaths, again and again, always the same until the dreams bled into waking life. And one morning, the village woke to silence. This is a disturbing story of the Durand family, and the notebook that predicted every death. Before we descend into this chilling tale, make sure to subscribe for more true horror stories lost in time. And tell us in the comments, do you believe premonitions can be real, or do they become real the moment we believe in them? In the winter of 1850, in a remote hillside home overlooking the valley of Clermont-Ferrand, something unimaginable happened behind stone walls and shuttered windows. A mother began dreaming of her children's deaths, again and again, always the same until the dreams bled into waking life. And one morning, the village woke to silence. This is a disturbing story of the Durand family, and a notebook that predicted every death. Before we descend into this chilling tale, make sure to subscribe for more true horror stories lost in time. And tell us in the comments, do you believe premonitions can be real, or do they become real the moment we believe in them? The Durand family lived in a stone house on the hillside, away from the village of Clermont-Ferrand. It was a solid dwelling, built 100 years earlier, with thick walls to withstand the northern winds. Henri Durand, a 32-year-old laborer, had inherited it from his father, as his father had received it from his own. A family house, where the Durands had always lived and worked the land. The winter of 1850 promised to be particularly harsh. The first snows had fallen as early as November, covering the fields with an immaculate white that stretched to the horizon. In the valley below, the village seemed frozen, its chimneys spewing plumes of gray smoke that rose toward a heavy, low sky. Henri Durand was known in the region as a pious and hard-working man. Every Sunday, he walked with his family to the village church, following the path that wound through the woods. His wife, Madeline, a 28-year-old woman with long chestnut hair, walked by his side, holding the hand of their daughter Eloise, 6 years old, while Julian, the 8-year-old eldest, proudly strode ahead of them. The youngest, Mathis, barely a year old, rested against his mother's chest, wrapped in a woolen blanket. Until recently, villagers described the Durands as an ordinary, respectable family. Henri worked hard. Madeline took care of the children and the house. On Sundays, after Mass, they exchanged a few words with other families before climbing back up to their hill. A simple life, dictated by the seasons and field work. But something had changed. The change was imperceptible at first. After Mathis's birth in January 1850, Madeline seemed more tired than usual, which was understandable for a mother caring for 3 young children. But as the months passed, her fatigue transformed into something darker, something deeper. It was as if a shadow had settled behind her eyes. Louise Moreau would later recount, the midwife who had assisted with Mathis's delivery and continued to visit the family occasionally. She still smiled, but her gaze remained fixed, as if she saw something that no one else could see. By August 1850, neighbors began to notice that Madeline no longer came down to the village as often as before. When she did come, she spoke little, bought what she needed, and quickly departed. Her face, once animated, had become pale and drawn. Her eyes, constantly ringed with dark circles, betrayed sleepless nights. It was Henri who first spoke of the nightmares to Father Thomas, the village priest. One morning in September, after Mass, he stayed behind, letting Madeline return home with the children. "My wife no longer sleeps," he confided to the priest. "Every night, she wakes up screaming, her body drenched in sweat." The nightmares had begun about 6 months after Mathis's birth. Initially occasional, they had become almost daily, and always the same. "She sees our children dying," Henri whispered, his voice breaking. "Every night, she sees them die in different ways, but always violent. Julian drowning in a well, the rainwater rising inexorably around him, Eloise locked in a chest, slowly suffocating. And little Mathis, she sees herself on the other side of a closed door, hearing his cries weaken until silence." The priest suggested prayers, holy water to sprinkle in the bedroom before sleep. He promised to come bless the house. But in October, when he made the journey up the hill, he was struck by the atmosphere that reigned in the Durand home. The shutters were almost all closed, letting in only a gray, diffuse light. The house, once immaculate, showed signs of neglect. Dust on the furniture, dishes piled up, and in a corner of the kitchen, on a small table, a notebook lay open, filled with tight, nervous handwriting. Madeline, who welcomed him, seemed to have aged 10 years in a few months. Her hair, which she had always carefully styled, hung in dull strands around her emaciated face. Her hands trembled slightly as she served tea. "The prayers aren't working, Father," she said in a strangely calm voice. "They continue to die in my dreams. And now I hear voices." She told him how, in the deepest part of the night, when nightmares woke her, she heard a whisper, one phrase, always the same, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Better now, quickly, than suffering later." The priest noticed the notebook. Madeline followed his gaze and, after hesitation, handed it to him. "I write everything down," she explained. "Every detail of the dreams. The dates, the times, the sounds, everything." The pages were filled with meticulous descriptions of her children's deaths. Drawings, too, made with a trembling hand. A well in the rain, a large wooden chest, a closed door behind which one could make out a cradle. And everywhere this repeated phrase, "Better now, quickly, than suffering later." What struck the priest was the precision of the details. These weren't simple nightmares, but complete, coherent visions that repeated night after night with terrifying regularity. Madeline even noted the exact time of each death in her dreams, the expression on each child's face, the sounds they made in their final moments. "Do you think God is sending me these visions?" she suddenly asked, her feverish eyes fixed on the priest. "Is it a warning or a punishment?" Father Thomas tried to reassure her. They were just nightmares, he told her, perhaps caused by exhaustion, by the normal worries of mother. He advised her to consult the village doctor, suggested herbal remedies to help her sleep. Before leaving, he blessed the house as promised, sprinkling each room with holy water, reciting prayers of protection. The children watched him curiously, especially Julian, whose intelligent eyes seemed to understand that something was wrong with his mother. On his way back, the priest couldn't help but glance back at the stone house. It stood, solitary on the hill, its windows like dark eyes staring down at the valley below. In November, villagers noticed that Henri came alone to Mass, leaving Madeline and the children at home. He explained that his wife was unwell, that the cold was too intense for the little ones. But his tense face betrayed more serious concerns. The doctor, Dr. Fournier, was finally called in mid-November. What he found worried him enough to speak to the village mayor. "Madame Durand suffers from a deep melancholy," he reported. "She is obsessed with the idea that her children will die. She hardly sleeps, barely eats. I prescribed laudanum to help her sleep, but I fear her condition is worsening." He also mentioned the notebook, which he had leafed through during his visit. "Disturbing writings," he admitted. "Descriptions of violent deaths, precise dates. She is convinced these visions are prophetic." The mayor suggested sending Madeline to an asylum in Reims, but Henri categorically opposed this. His wife was not crazy, he insisted, just exhausted. She would get better with rest and care. December arrived, bringing snowstorms that further isolated the house on the hill. Henri no longer came down to the village, except for the most urgent necessities. When asked for news of his family, he replied briefly that all was well, but his eyes told another story. The last person to see the Durand family together was Marie Dubois, a neighbor who lived at the foot of the hill. On December 28th, she brought a basket of food, concern for the children. The house was freezing, she would later tell investigators. The children were pale, too quiet. Julian looked at me with eyes that seemed to be pleading. Madeline was sitting by the window, staring at the falling snow. She held her notebook clutched to her chest. Marie noticed that the notebook seemed thicker, filled with new pages. When she asked Madeline how she was doing, she turned slowly toward her, a strange smile on her lips. "The voices are louder now," she said. "They're telling me what I must do to save them." Henri quickly escorted Marie to the door, assuring her that he was taking care of everything, that Madeline was just going through a rough patch. But Marie saw the fear in his eyes, a deep fear that made her shiver more than a December cold. It was the last time anyone from the village saw the Durands alive. In the following days, a snowstorm descended on the region, cutting off all communication. It wasn't until January 2nd, 1851, that two men from the village, concerned at seeing no sign of life from the house on the hill, decided to brave the snow to check that all was well. What they discovered that day forever marked the history of Clermont-Ferrand, a tragedy whose echoes still resonate today in local memories. A story of nightmares become reality, of macabre predictions, and of a mother persuaded she had to kill out of love. But before describing the horror that awaited these two brave men, we must return to the last days of December 1850, when Madeline Durand's nightmares reached their peak, pushing this once loving mother toward an unimaginable act, an act that she would record, like everything else, in her cursed notebook. The notebook found in the Durand home contained 212 pages of meticulous descriptions. Every nightmare, every whispered message, every premonition, all recorded in Madeline's increasingly frantic handwriting. When investigators opened it on January 3rd, 1851, they discovered something that defied explanation. The final entry, dated December 31st, described not just her children's predicted deaths, but the exact manner in which their bodies would be discovered. As December progressed, the isolation of the Durand family deepened. Heavy snowfall had made the path from their hillside home to the village nearly impassable. Henri ventured down only when absolutely necessary, trudging through knee-deep snow to purchase essential supplies. Each time, the villagers noted how he seemed increasingly haggard, his once strong frame now stooped with worry. His eyes were hollow, recalled Marcel Benoit, the village baker. When I asked after his family, he simply nodded and said they were managing, but there was something in his voice, a tremor that hadn't been there before. According to later testimonies, it was during this period that Madeline's notebook underwent its most disturbing transformation. What had begun as a simple journal to record her nightmares was becoming something far more sinister, a compendium of death meticulously documented with an almost scientific precision. The notebook itself was unremarkable, a leather-bound volume with yellowed pages, the kind used by merchants to track inventory or by teachers to record grades. Henri had purchased it the previous spring in Reims, during one of his infrequent trips to the city, a practical gift for his wife, who had always enjoyed writing. Dr. Fournier, who examined the notebook during his visit in November, later provided a detailed account of its contents to the authorities. The entries began innocuously enough, he stated. Brief descriptions of troubling dreams, the kind any new mother might have, fears of harm coming to her children, anxiety about their safety. But by summer, the entries had taken on a different character. They were longer, more detailed, and there was a certainty to them that was deeply unsettling. An entry from July 27th read, "Julian in the well again, the water rising faster tonight. I could see his small hands gripping the stones, his fingernails breaking as he tried to climb. The rain was so loud I could barely hear his screams. He lasted 4 minutes and 38 seconds before the water covered his head. I know because I counted every second." Another, dated August 12th, described Eloise's suffocation. "The chest was my grandmother's, oak with iron hindings. I recognized the carved flowers on the lid. Eloise was wearing her white nightgown, the one with blue ribbons. She pounded on the lid for 17 minutes before her movements became weaker. I tried to open it, but the lock would not budge. I could hear her small voice calling Maman, Maman, until there was only silence." The entry about Mathis was perhaps the most disturbing. "I stood outside the nursery door. It was locked from the inside, though how this could be, I don't know. Mathis was crying, then coughing, then making a sound like he couldn't breathe. I pushed against the door until my shoulder bled, but it would not open. When the silence finally came, I knew he was gone." The clock in the hallway showed 3:17. What alarmed Dr. Fournier most was not just the vivid detail of these descriptions, but the dates attached to them. Each entry predicted a specific date for each child's death, all falling on the same day. December 31st, 1850. When I questioned Madame Durand about these dates, she looked at me with perfect lucidity, the doctor recalled. She said, "That is when it will happen. That is when they die if I do nothing to prevent it." As December wore on, Madeline added new elements to her entries. Drawings appeared, crude but recognizable sketches of the well behind their house, the wooden chest door in the attic, the nursery door. And increasingly, there were references to voices, specifically one recurring whisper that seemed to have taken hold in her mind. "It speaks to me when I'm between sleeping and waking," she wrote on December 10th. Always the same words. "Better now, quickly, than suffering later. At first, I thought it was the wind or my imagination, but now I hear it even in daylight. Sometimes when I'm holding Mathis, or braiding Eloise's hair, or watching Julian read by the fire. Better now, better now." Father Thomas, who had been permitted to examine the notebook during his October visit, was particularly troubled by Madeline's interpretation of these nightmares. She had begun to see them not as dreams, but as divine premonitions, warnings sent to prepare her for the inevitable. She asked me if God would forgive a mother who killed her children to spare them a more terrible fate. The priest confided to the village magistrate after the tragedy. I told her such thoughts were the devil's work, not God's, but she seemed unconvinced. She said, "What if the mercy is in the quickness?" By mid-December, Henri had taken precautions. According to his brother Claude, who visited from a neighboring village around December 20th, Henri had removed all potential weapons from the house. Knives, scissors, even the hunting rifle that had been passed down through generations of Durand men. He told me Madeline had been standing over the children at night, just watching them sleep for hours. Claude would later testify. He'd woken once to find her with a kitchen knife, not doing anything, just holding it while standing over Julian's bed. When he asked what she was doing, she said she was practicing being strong enough when the time came. Claude urged his brother to send Madeline away, to the asylum in Reims, or to a convent where she might receive proper care. But Henri refused. He believed he could protect them all, Claude recalled. He said, "She's still in there, my Madeline. Sometimes I see her, just for a moment, behind the fear." Henry's devotion to his wife was well known in the village. They had married young, Madeline just 17, Henri 21. Theirs had been a love match, unusual for the time when most marriages were arrangements of convenience. For 11 years, they had built a life together, weathering poor harvests, a devastating fire that had destroyed half their barn, and the loss of their first child, a daughter who had lived only 3 days. Through it all, Henri had remained steadfast. Even now, as Madeline's mind fractured, he believed he could hold their family together through the sheer force of his love and faith. But the notebook suggests that Madeline's decline accelerated rapidly in the final weeks of December. Her handwriting, once neat and controlled, became jagged and sprawling. Entire pages were filled with the phrase "better now," repeated hundreds of times. Ink blots and smudges suggested she was writing in a frenzied state, perhaps in the dead of night. On December 26th, she made a particularly chilling entry. "I've seen how they die if I do nothing. But tonight, I saw something new. I saw how to save them. It will require courage, and Henri must not know. He doesn't understand that death can be a mercy, that some suffering cannot be endured. But I understand now. The voice has shown me." Marie Dubois, the last outsider to see the family alive on December 28th, provided crucial insights into the final days. During her brief visit, she noticed several disturbing details that, in retrospect, were clear warning signs. The children were too quiet, she recalled. Not the normal quiet of well-behaved children, but a stillness that seemed unnatural. Especially Julian. He was always such a lively boy, full of questions. But that day, he just sat by the fire, staring at his mother. When I tried to engage him, he whispered, "Maman doesn't sleep anymore. She writes all night." Marie also noticed that the house was unusually cold. Henri had always kept a good fire going, especially with young children in the house. But that day, the hearth was nearly cold. When I mentioned it, he muttered something about conserving wood. But there was a wood pile outside, nearly untouched. Most significantly, Marie observed that Madeline seemed calmer than she had in months. It was an eerie sort of calm, she said, like the stillness before a storm. She sat by the window with that notebook clutched to her chest, smiling faintly. When I asked how she was feeling, she said, "Better. I know what must be done now." That strange serenity, the resignation of someone who has made a terrible decision and found peace in it, would later be cited by Dr. Fournier as a classic sign of a mind that has crossed from tortured indecision into the dangerous clarity of psychosis. The notebook's final entries reveal Madeline's descent into this fatal clarity. On December 29th, she wrote, "I prepared everything. The papilla infusion is steeping. Henri suspects nothing. The children trust me completely, as they should. A mother's duty is to protect her children from suffering. What greater love could there be than to save them from the fates I've seen?" Papilla, or opium poppy, was commonly grown in gardens throughout the region. Its sedative properties were well known, particularly among mothers who would give small amounts to colicky infants or teething toddlers. But in sufficient quantities, it could induce a deep sleep from which one might never wake. The penultimate entry, dated December 30th, was brief but resolute. "Henri tried to stop me. He found the notebook and read it while I was gathering flowers by the stream. He's locked it away and watches me constantly now. But he must sleep eventually. And when he does, I'll do what must be done. The voice says there's still time. Better now, quickly, than suffering later." The final entry, dated December 31st, was written in a surprisingly steady hand. "It is finished. They did not suffer. I laid them on our bed, just as I saw in my first vision. Henri fought so hard to stop me. I had not intended for him to join them, but perhaps it's better this way. The snow is falling heavily now. By morning, we will all be covered in white. Pure, protected. The voices are silent at last." What makes this final entry so disturbing is not just its content, but the fact that it accurately predicted the scene that would be discovered 3 days later by the villagers who braved the snow to check on the isolated family. The notebook itself was found on Madeline's lap as she sat in a rocking chair by the nursery window, its pages stained with both ink and blood. The final pages contain a set of drawings, precise, detailed sketches of the 3 children laid out on the marital bed, flowers clasped in their small hands, their faces peaceful in eternal sleep, exactly as they were found. As investigators would later note, the most inexplicable aspect of the case was not the tragic actions of a mother driven to madness by her nightmares, but the prophetic nature of those nightmares themselves. For while Madeline had killed her children to prevent the specific deaths she had foreseen, drowning, suffocation, and unexplained illness, the details of how and when she would do so were themselves predicted with uncanny accuracy in the early pages of her journal. Had she simply fulfilled her own prophecy? Or had something darker been at work in the isolated house on the hill? The notebook, now preserved in the archives of Reims, continues to baffle those who study it. The precision of its final predictions has led some to dismiss it as a forgery, created after the fact. But those who have examined the original are unanimous. The entire document, including the final entry, was written by the same hand, Madeline's. The investigation into the Durand family tragedy revealed a chilling timeline. For 3 days after their deaths, heavy snow isolated the hillside home. As the blizzard intensified, fresh snow sealed every entrance, creating a perfect tomb. Inside, as village physician Dr. Fournier would later note, the house grew colder than the frozen bodies it contained. But the most unsettling detail was found in Henry's frozen hand, a crumpled page torn from Madeline's notebook, dated 3 months earlier, predicting not only his children's deaths, but his own futile struggle at the locked door. January in Clermont-sur-Marne brought the harshest weather of the year. The winter of 1850 to 1851 was exceptional even by local standards, with snowdrifts reaching the second-story windows of some homes and temperatures that froze the Valley River solid. It was against this backdrop of punishing cold that Auguste Renard and his brother-in-law Philippe Moreau set out on January 2nd, 1851, to check on the Durand family. The path up the hillside was completely obscured by snow. "We had to use walking sticks to test the ground ahead of us," Auguste later recounted. The snow was waist-deep in places. It took us nearly 2 hours to reach the house, a journey that normally takes 20 minutes. What struck the men as they approached was the absolute silence. No smoke rose from the chimney. No footprints marred the pristine snow. The shutters were all closed, giving the house a desolate appearance. Their concern mounting, the men made their way to the front door where they made their first grim discovery. Henri Durand's body, half buried in snow, slumped against the door from the outside. He was frozen solid, Auguste recalled. His face was... I've never seen such an expression of terror. His hands were bloody, with splinters embedded in the flesh, as if he'd been desperately trying to claw his way into his own home. Most disturbing was the position of Henri's body. He had died trying to enter the house, not leave it. The door was locked from the inside, and based on the accumulation of snow around his body, he had been there for several days. In his right hand, frozen in a death grip, was a crumpled page torn from a notebook. The men left it in place for the authorities to examine. This page would later prove to be one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the case. Unable to enter through the doors, they broke a window at the rear of the house to gain entry. The cold inside was as bitter as outside, Philippe said. But there was something else, a heaviness in the air, a stillness that felt unnatural. The interior of the house was orderly, showing no signs of struggle. A pot hung over the cold ashes on the hearth, containing what appeared to be a frozen soup. 3 bowls were set out on the kitchen table, along with a cup of what Tess would later reveal to be a strong infusion of opium poppy. Following a faint, sweet smell, the men made their way upstairs to the master bedroom. What they found there would haunt them forever. On the large bed lay the bodies of the 3 Durand children, Julian, Eloise, and baby Mathis, arranged side by side as if sleeping. Each child wore clean night clothes, their hair neatly combed, their small hands folded over their chests, each clutching a dried flower. Their faces were peaceful, showing no signs of pain or fear. They looked like porcelain dolls, Auguste would later say, so still and pale. If not for the unnatural coldness of the room and their absolute stillness, one might have thought they were merely sleeping. In the nursery, they found Madeleine. She sat in a rocking chair by the window, her body rigid with frost, her eyes open and fixed on the snow-covered landscape outside. In her lap lay the infamous notebook, open to its final page. Her wrists were slashed, the blood frozen in dark rivulets down her arms. Beside her was an empty cup that contained the same opium infusion found downstairs, a razor with a bone handle, and 3 locks of hair, one from each of her children, tied with different colored ribbons. She was smiling, Philippe recalled with a shudder. Not a peaceful smile, but something triumphant, as if she had accomplished some great task. The men retrieved from the house and made their way back to the village to alert the authorities. Due to the continuing snowstorm, officials from Reims would not arrive until January 4th. Dr. Fournier carefully removed the crumpled page from Henri's frozen hand, written in Madeleine's handwriting and dated October 17th, over 2 months before the tragedy. It contained a description that matched, with disturbing precision, the scene they had discovered. I see Henri outside in the snow. He pounds on the door, but I cannot let him in. He would stop what must be done. His face is twisted with fear. He knows what I intend. But by then it will be too late. The children will already be sleeping their final sleep, spared from the drowning, the suffocation, the wasting illness that awaits them. He will die in the cold, his hands bloody from trying to break down the door. I weep for him, but I cannot change what must be. This page suggested that Madeleine had foreseen not only her children's supposed fates, but also her husband's actual death, exactly as it occurred. Dr. Fournier's examination provided a clinical understanding of the sequence of events. The children had died first, likely on December 30th or 31st. Each had been given a strong dose of opium infusion, enough to induce a deep sleep from which they would never wake. There were no signs of struggle, suggesting they had drunk the drug liquid willingly. Henri's death had occurred later, on the evening of December 31st. The condition of his body suggested he had been outside for at least 24 hours before he succumbed to the cold. Scratches and bruising on his hands indicated he had tried desperately to break into the house. Madeleine herself had died last, in the early hours of January 1st. After taking some of the same opium infusion, she had cut her wrists with the razor. The wounds were deep and precise, indicating she had been determined to end her life. But the clinical details did little to explain the psychological and potentially supernatural dimensions of the tragedy. For that, investigators turned to the notebook. What emerged was a chronicle of a mind unraveling, or perhaps opening to influences beyond normal human experience. The progression is clear. Father Thomas observed. What began as ordinary nightmares gradually transformed into something far more specific and insistent. By October, Madeline was no longer simply recording dreams, but transcribing what she believed to be divine or demonic messages. The recurring phrase, "better now, quickly, than suffering later," appeared with increasing frequency, sometimes filling entire pages. It had become a mantra for Madeline, a justification for the unthinkable act she was contemplating. What troubled investigators most was the predictive element. How could Madeline have described, months in advance, not only her own actions, but also the precise manner of her husband's death? The investigation revealed that Madeline had made methodical preparations for her final act, harvesting opium poppies, collecting flowers, sewing new nightclothes for children, and writing letters explaining that she was saving them from terrible fates. These preparations, spanning several weeks, contradicted any notion that the killings were a spontaneous act of madness. Madeline had planned meticulously. Henri had clearly been aware of the danger. He had removed all obvious weapons, nailed shut the cover of the well behind the house, one of the prophesied sites of death in Madeline's dreams, and moved a large chest from the attic to the barn. Notes found in his Bible suggested he had been planning to take his wife to a specialized facility in Paris after the New Year. "She worsens daily," he wrote on December 27th. "I fear for the children, for all of us. Perhaps in Paris they will know how to draw my Madeline back from the shadows that had claimed her." The question remained, what had happened in those final hours? How had Madeline managed to drug her children and lock Henri out of the house? The answer came from Julian's diary, found tucked between his mattress and bed frame. His final entry, dated December 30th, provided a child's perspective on the unfolding horror. "Maman made hot chocolate today. She never makes hot chocolate except for special days. She said it was to keep away the cold, but it tasted strange. Papa was chopping wood outside. Maman watched him through the window for a long time, then locked the door. She said we were playing a game, and Papa wasn't allowed in until we finished." Eloise fell asleep at the table. Mathis, too. "I feel very tired, but I wanted to write this down. Maman is singing now. She says we're going to sleep in the big bed tonight, all together, and that when we wake up, we'll be somewhere safe where the bad dreams can't find us." The simplicity of the boy's words, the innocence with which he recorded his own approaching death, struck the investigators profoundly. Madeline had waited until Henri was occupied outside, then executed her plan with a mother's intimate knowledge of what would appeal to her children. The investigation concluded on January 15th, 1851. The official verdict listed the cause as familicide due to acute melancholia and maternal delusion. Madeline was posthumously declared not of sound mind. The family was buried in consecrated ground. Father Thomas, having successfully argued that Madeline's mental state absolved her of the mortal sin of murder and suicide. But the case continued to haunt those involved. Dr. Fournier, who had been skeptical of supernatural explanations, wrote in his private journal, "Science fails to account for certain aspects of the Durand tragedy. The predictive elements, in particular, defy rational explanation. I find myself unable to dismiss entirely the possibility that Madeline Durand was indeed receiving communications from some source beyond our understanding." The house on the hill remained empty after the tragedy. No one from the village would consider living there. Eventually, nature began to reclaim the structure. But according to local lore, on December 31st each year, smoke can be seen rising from the ruined chimney. And those brave enough to venture near the property on that date report hearing the same phrase, whispered on the winter wind, "Better now, quickly, than suffering later." When the official investigation team arrived from Reims on January 4th, 1851, they brought with them the latest forensic techniques of the era. But what they discovered in the Durand home defied scientific explanation. The children's bodies showed no signs of struggle, only peaceful expressions and clutched flowers. More disturbing still were the pages of Madeline's notebook that described, in perfect detail, the exact arrangement of the bodies weeks before their deaths. But it was what they found beneath the floorboards that truly shocked even the most hardened investigators. A collection of small wooden figures, carved in the likeness of each family member, each one bearing a small red mark precisely where their fatal wounds would appear. The first official to enter the Durand home after the discovery of the bodies was Magistrate Victor LeBlanc, accompanied by Inspector Maurice Pelletier of the Reims Police. Both men had extensive experience investigating violent crimes, but neither was prepared for what awaited them in the isolated stone house. "I have seen the aftermath of murder many times," LeBlanc would later write in his official report, "but never have I encountered a scene that projected such a profound sense of wrongness, not due to disorder or violence. Quite the contrary. The meticulousness of the arrangement, the peaceful expressions on the victims' faces, the ritual-like positioning of objects. It was as if we had stepped into a carefully arranged tableau rather than a crime scene. The bodies had been removed to the village church by the time the officials arrived, but the house remained exactly as it had been found. The freezing temperatures had preserved everything, from the half-prepared meal in the kitchen to the bloodstains in the nursery where Madeline had ended her life. Inspector Pelletier began a systematic examination of the house, starting with the kitchen. Here he found 3 bowls containing traces of hot chocolate, each with a residue of opium at the bottom. The concentration was remarkably precise, enough to induce unconsciousness in each child based on their different weights, but not enough to be immediately detected by taste. In the pantry, hidden behind jars of preserved fruits, the inspector discovered a small packet of dried poppy pods, crushed into a fine powder. Tests later confirmed these were the same variety found in the children's bowls and in the cup beside Madeline's rocking chair. Moving upstairs, the officials examined the master bedroom where the children's bodies had been found. The bed linens had been changed recently, unusually fine sheets for a farming family, embroidered with small flowers that matched those found in the children's hands. These sheets had been part of Madeline's trousseau, used only on special occasions. The arrangement of the bodies suggests a ritual purpose rather than mere practicality, LeBlanc observed. The children were positioned equidistant from each other, their heads resting on embroidered pillows, their arms carefully arranged so that their hands crossed over their chests. Each held a different dried flower, lavender for Julian, chamomile for Eloise, and a small white rose for the infant Mathis. Beneath each child's pillow, the investigators found a letter written in Madeline's hand. Each was addressed to the corresponding child and sealed with wax. When opened, they revealed messages of both love and terrible conviction. To Julian, she wrote, "My brave, intelligent son, I have seen you drowning, calling for help that never comes. I have heard your final breath bubbling through water. This is not your fate now. You will feel only peace, a gentle sleep from which you will awaken in a better place. Forgive me for the choice I make. It is made in love to spare you from the water that rises in my dreams." Eloise's letter contained similar sentiments. "My beautiful daughter, with your father's eyes and my smile. The darkness that awaits you in that wooden prison. The air growing thin as you call my name. This is what I prevent tonight. You will not know that terror, that slow stealing of breath. Instead, you will drift into dreams, surrounded by those who love you most. This is my final gift to you." The note to Mathis was simpler. "My little angel, my last gift from God. Your life would have been so brief, ended by forces I cannot fight. But I can change how you leave this world. Not alone, not afraid, but in my arms, peaceful in love until the end." Each letter was signed, "With eternal love, your mother who will follow you soon." The nursery where Madeline's body had been found contained the most disturbing evidence. Her rocking chair faced a window, positioned to view the snow-covered landscape and the path leading up to the house, the same path her husband would have taken in his desperate attempt to return. The floor around the chair was stained with blood, now frozen in dark patterns that radiated outward from where she had cut her wrists. On the small table beside the chair lay the notorious notebook, open to its final entry. The previous pages showed a rapid deterioration in Madeline's handwriting, from the neat, controlled script of early entries to frantic, pressed lettering of the final pages. It was Inspector Pelletier who made the most shocking discovery. While examining the floorboard in the nursery, he noticed one that seemed slightly raised. Removing it, he found a small hollow space containing a wooden box, intricately carved with symbols that local experts would later identify as ancient protective runes, common in the region's folk traditions. Inside the box were 5 small wooden figures, each roughly carved but recognizable as representations of the Durand family members. Each figure bore markings in red. Henry showed a crimson line across the throat, while the 3 children had small red dots on their temples. Madeline's figure had red lines across both wrists. These carvings appear to be several months old, Pelletier noted. The wool has aged and the red pigment has dried completely. They were created long before the actual murders took place. Even more disturbing, beneath the figures lay a folded piece of paper containing locks of hair from each family member, tied with threads of different colors. According to local folklore specialists consulted during the investigation, such items were traditionally used in sympathetic magic. The belief that actions performed on a representation of a person would affect the actual individual. The investigation also extended to the grounds surrounding the house. Behind the main structure stood a small well, the same well where Madeline had envisioned Julian drowning. As Henri had apparently anticipated, the cover had been nailed shut with heavy iron spikes. Similarly, the large wooden chest mentioned in her visions of Eloise's death had been removed from the house entirely and secured in the barn, its lid bound with rope and sealed with a padlock. It appears that Monsieur Durand was attempting to thwart his wife's visions by eliminating the specific instruments of death she had foreseen, Pelletier observed. Yet in doing so, he may have inadvertently reinforced a belief in their prophetic nature. The village doctor's examination of the bodies revealed little beyond what was already suspected. The children had died from a combination of opium overdose and subsequent smothering, a mercy killing performed while they were deeply unconscious. Henri had succumbed to hypothermia after hours exposed to the bitter cold. Madeline had bled to death from self-inflicted wounds to her wrists, likely after taking a smaller dose of the same opium mixture she had given her children. All deaths occurred within a 24-hour period, Dr. Fournier concluded. The children first, likely on the evening of December 30th. Monsieur Durand sometime during the night of December 31st. Madame Durand in the early hours of January 1st, 1851. This timeline aligned perfectly with the predictions Madeline had recorded in her notebook months earlier, that all 3 children would die on December 31st, 1850. The investigation also involved interviews with villagers who had known the Durand family. These accounts painted a picture of Madeline's gradual transformation from a loving, if somewhat reserved, mother to a woman consumed by terrible visions. Louise Moreau, the midwife who had attended Mathis's birth, provided particularly valuable insights. After the baby came, she seemed different, more distant. When I visited in March, she told me she was having trouble sleeping. By June, she was having night terrors so severe that Henri would find her standing in the children's room in the middle of the night, just watching them breathe. Father Thomas provided context about Madeline's religious state. She came to confession weekly, then daily as her condition worsened. At first, she asked for prayers against nightmares. By November, she was asking of a mother who killed her children to spare them suffering will be forgiven by God. I told her such thoughts were sinful, but she seemed to take this as confirmation that she was being tested, like Abraham with Isaac. As the investigation progressed, attention increasingly focused on the notebook itself. The early entries described typical maternal anxieties, fears for her children's safety, worry about illness, concern over accidents. But by summer, these had transformed into specific, recurring visions of their deaths, described with disturbing precision. More unnerving still were entries that accurately predicted events no one could have foreseen. On September 3rd, Madeline wrote, "The old elm by the crossroads will fall during the next storm. It will crush the Moreau's cart, killing their horse." 3 days later, during an unexpected thunderstorm, exactly this occurred. Another entry from October predicted, The baker's youngest son will develop red spots on his face and hands. By the full moon, 3 other children in the village will show the same signs. This preceded a small outbreak of scarlet fever that affected precisely 4 children, beginning with the baker's son. These coincidences, if indeed they are mere coincidences, suggest one of 2 possibilities, Magistrate LeBlanc wrote. Either Madame Durand possessed some form of second sight, or she was instrumental in causing these events to occur. Given the nature of some incidents, such as the falling tree, the latter seems implausible. As the investigation nears its conclusion, officials face a troubling question. If Madeline had genuinely experienced prophetic visions, what was their source? The local priest suggested divine testing, while village elders whisper about darker possibilities. Old pagan influences that still lingered in the remote countryside, or malevolent spirits drawn to the isolated house on the hill. Dr. Fournier offered more scientific explanation. Postpartum melancholia, combined with exhaustion and possibly a pre-existing nervous condition, could produce hallucinations so vivid that the sufferer cannot distinguish them from reality. The predictions that came true may be explained by subconscious observation of subtle signs, a weakening tree, early symptoms of illness, that most would overlook. Yet even he admitted this failed to account for all aspects of the case, particularly the precognitive elements that seem to transcend rational explanation. The final report, submitted to regional authorities on January 20th, 1851, officially classified the deaths as familicide resulting from maternal psychosis, with Madeline deemed not responsible for her actions due to mental infirmity. The supernatural elements were mentioned only in passing, dismissed as folkloric interpretations applied by a disturbed mind to natural phenomena. But in private correspondence between Magistrate LeBlanc and his superiors in Paris, a different sentiment emerged. While our official findings must necessarily conform to rational and legal frameworks, I feel compelled to note that certain aspects of this case remain inexplicable through conventional understanding. The predictive accuracy of Madame Durand's writings, the ritualistic elements of the crime scene, and the inexplicable knowledge she possessed of events yet to occur, these suggest dimensions to this tragedy that extend beyond the scope of our current investigative methods. The case was officially closed, but its mysteries endured. The house remained empty, gradually falling into ruin as nature reclaimed the hillside. Local farmers refused to work the surrounding fields, claiming the land had been tainted. Children were forbidden from venturing near the property, especially after dark. And on December 31st each year, as darkness falls over Clermont-sur-Marne, villagers still secure their doors with extra care. For on that night, according to local legend, the sound of a mother singing a lullaby can be heard drifting down from the abandoned house on the hill, a gentle voice promising protection from the horrors that visit in dreams. 175 years have passed since the tragedy of the Durand family, yet their story continues to cast a long shadow over Clermont-sur-Marne. The ruins of their stone house still stand on the hillside, blackened by a mysterious fire in 1887 that locals swear started on its own. Most disturbing are the reports that continue to this day. 3 children's voices singing on December nights, a woman's silhouette in the upper window, and multiple documented cases of mothers in the region experiencing identical dreams, of drowning sons, suffocating daughters, and a voice whispering better now than later. What began as one family's tragedy has become something far more sinister, a legacy of darkness that refuses to be buried. The investigation into the Durand family murders officially ended in January 1851, but the case continued to resonate through the decades, evolving from local tragedy to regional legend to what some researchers now consider one of the most compelling examples of potentially supernatural influence in documented criminal history. For the residents of Clermont-sur-Marne, the aftermath was immediate and tangible. The Durand property remained untouched for years, the fields surrounding it left fallow. No one would purchase the land or the remains of the house, despite its prime location and the regional agricultural boom of the 1860s. There was an unspoken agreement among the villagers, wrote François Bertrand, the village mayor from 1855 to 1872, in his personal memoirs. The house on the hill was to be left to time and the elements. Some suggested burning it down, but others feared this would only release whatever darkness had taken hold there. The first indication that the Durand tragedy might be more than an isolated incident came in 1863, 12 years after the original events. Marie Claire Rousseau, a young mother living in a neighboring village, began experiencing vivid nightmares about her children's deaths. Like Madeline Durand, she kept a detailed journal of these dreams, which described her 4-year-old son drowning in a rain-swollen stream and her infant daughter succumbing to a mysterious respiratory ailment. What made these dreams particularly disturbing was that Marie Claire had no knowledge of the Durand case, yet her descriptions mirror Madeline's with uncanny precision, right down to the recurring phrase, "Better now, quickly, than suffering later." Unlike Madeline, Marie Claire received immediate intervention. Her husband consulted Dr. Fournier, who recognized the similarities to the Durand case and recommended immediate relocation away from the area. "I believe there is something in this valley, something in the very air perhaps, that affects certain susceptible individuals," Dr. Fournier wrote in his case notes, "particularly women who have recently given birth. Whatever it is, distance seems to be the only reliable cure." The Rousseau family moved to Lyon within the month. Marie Claire's nightmares ceased almost immediately, never to return. This pattern of relocation as treatment would be repeated several times over the next decades, as other cases emerged with striking similarities to Madeline's descent. Between 1851 and 1925, regional medical records document 7 cases of mothers experiencing what came to be known locally as les rêves de Madeline, Madeline's dreams, vivid, recurring nightmares of their children's deaths, accompanied by a compulsion to record these visions and, in several cases, a dangerous conviction that mercy-killing was preferable to the fates they foresaw. All of these cases occurred within a 15-kilometer radius of the original Durand home. In each instance where the family relocated beyond this perimeter, the symptoms resolved completely. In the 2 cases where families remained, tragedy followed: a double infanticide in 1879 and a murder-suicide in 1904, both bearing ritual elements reminiscent of the Durand case. The house itself developed a dark reputation that extended beyond local superstition. In 1887, a team of researchers from the Society for Psychical Research in London visited the site. Their expedition ended abruptly when a fire of unknown origin broke out in the abandoned structure on their second night there. "The flames were unlike any I have witnessed before," wrote Dr. William Barrett, the team leader. "They burned with a peculiar blue-green hue and spread in patterns that defied the natural movement of fire. Most disturbing was a complete absence of heat at a distance of more than a few feet from the flames, despite their apparent intensity. The fire damaged much of the upper floor, but failed to destroy the structure entirely. Local authorities attempted to demolish the remaining walls, only to find that workers refused to approach the site. Eventually, they simply cordoned off the area and left the charred ruins as a grim monument to the tragedy. Throughout the early 20th century, the Durand case occasionally resurfaced in medical literature, typically cited as an example of postpartum psychosis. Psychiatrists of the era focused on psychological aspects, generally dismissing predictive elements as coincidence or retrospective embellishment. This rational approach was challenged in 1937 when Professor Jean Moreau of the University of Strasbourg undertook a comprehensive review of the case, including previously unconsidered documents from ecclesiastical archives. "What distinguishes the Durand case from typical instances of postpartum psychosis," Moreau wrote, "is the verifiable predictive element. Madeline Durand accurately foretold specific events: the falling elm, the scarlet fever outbreak, and most disturbingly, the precise manner and date of her family's demise, months before they occurred. These predictions are documented in her notebook and corroborated by multiple witnesses who saw these entries before the events transpired." Moreau proposed what he called regional psychic susceptibility, the theory that certain geographical locations might serve as focal points for paranormal phenomena affecting psychologically vulnerable individuals who reside there. During World War II, the region around Clermont-Ferrand was largely abandoned as residents fled the German occupation. Local records from this period are sparse, but oral histories collected in the 1970s suggest that German soldiers stationed near the ruins reported unusual phenomena, unexplained sounds, sudden temperature drops, and in one frequently repeated account, the apparition of a woman in white seen walking from the ruins toward the village on the winter solstice of 1943. The modern era brought renewed interest in the Durand case. In 1977, the French television program Les Enquêtes Impossibles featured a segment on the tragedy, bringing national attention to what had previously been a regional legend. The producers interviewed elderly residents who claimed to have heard first-hand accounts from those who had known the Durand family. One such testimony came from Jean Mercier, then 93, whose grandmother had been a childhood friend of Julian Durand. "My grandmother told me that Julian was a sweet, serious boy who loved books. In the weeks before it happened, he became withdrawn. He told my grandmother that his mother had started speaking to someone who wasn't there, someone she called the messenger. He said sometimes he could hear it too, late at night, whispering in the dark corners of their home." The television program also documented modern phenomena associated with the ruins. Local residents reported hearing children's voices, singing traditional lullabies on still December nights. Several amateur photographers captured unexplained light anomalies around the property. Most compelling was infrared footage showing a clear temperature differential in the shape of a seated figure in what had once been the nursery, precisely where Madeline's body had been found. In 1982, a definitive academic study of the case was conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Laurent of the Sorbonne Department of Historical Psychology. Her exhaustive research included analysis of the original notebook, police reports, medical examinations, and local records spanning more than a century. Dr. Laurent's conclusions were deliberately measured. While contemporary science cannot validate supernatural explanations, neither can it fully account for all aspects of the Durand case through known psychological or medical mechanisms. The predictive accuracy, the recurrence of similar cases within a specific geographical boundary, and the persistent phenomena associated with the location suggest that whatever affected Madeline, Durand may not have died with her. Of particular interest to Dr. Laurent was the pattern of recurrence. The 7 documented cases similar to Madeline's were not randomly distributed over time, but appear to follow a specific cycle, approximately every 12 years, with the most severe incidents occurring at 24-year intervals. This cyclical pattern continued into modern times, with hospital records from Reims showing statistically significant increases in postpartum depression cases with paranoid features during these same intervals, always clustered within the same geographical area. In 1998, the land surrounding the Durand ruins was purchased by the Société pour l'Étude des Phénomènes Paranormaux, Society for the Study of Paranormal Phenomena, with the intention of establishing a permanent research facility. Their preliminary findings suggested several anomalies. The area immediately surrounding the ruins shows persistent temperature variations that cannot be explained by normal environmental factors. Electronic equipment frequently malfunctions within a 50-meter radius of the original house foundation. Soil and water samples reveal no toxic or hallucinogenic compounds, eliminating obvious environmental explanations. Individuals who spend more than 48 hours on the property report significant increases in dream activity, particularly dreams involving children in danger. The most controversial aspect of the CEP research involved a series of controlled overnight stays by volunteer subjects. Those who slept in the vicinity of the ruins reported a significantly higher incidence of nightmares than control groups. More troubling, several female participants with young children experienced nearly identical dreams, visions of their children dying in circumstances mirroring Madeline's original nightmares. One participant, a 32-year-old mother too who had no prior knowledge of the Durand case details, reported the following. "I dreamed my son was trapped in a well, the water rising around him. I could see his face looking up at me, but I couldn't reach him. When I woke, I heard a voice clearly say, 'Better now than later.' The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once." Local authorities, concerned about the psychological impact of these experiments, eventually restricted access to the site. Today, the ruins are fenced off, visible from the road but inaccessible to the public. Despite these precautions, the area continues to attract both serious researchers and thrill seekers, particularly around December 31st, the anniversary of the tragedy. Modern investigations have attempted to apply technological solutions to the mystery. In 2012, a team from the European Institute of Parapsychology conducted an extensive audio survey of the property, using sensitive equipment capable of detecting sounds below the threshold of human hearing. During the day, Nothing unusual was recorded, but between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. on 3 consecutive nights, the equipment captured what sound analysts described as whispered speech patterns too faint to be deciphered, but displaying the rhythmic and tonal qualities of human speech. Most notably, these sounds originated from areas where no physical sound sources existed, empty spaces within the ruins. Perhaps most disturbing are the continuing reports of psychological effects on the surrounding population. A 2018 epidemiological study found that the rate of severe postpartum depression within a 15-kilometer radius of the Durand property is 327% higher than the national average. This statistical anomaly persists even when controlling for socioeconomic factors, access to health care, and genetic predisposition. For the current residents of Clermont-Ferrand, the Durand case is more than historical curiosity or paranormal legend. It remains a living presence that shapes local practices and beliefs. New mothers are still advised to keep journals of their dreams and to leave the area temporarily if they experience recurring nightmares about their children. December 31st is marked by a special Mass at the village church, offering prayers for the souls of the Durand family and protection for the living. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2019, when Emily Bertrand, a young mother living less than a kilometer from the ruins, began experiencing vivid nightmares about her children drowning and suffocating. Nightmares identical in content to those recorded by Madeleine Durand 168 years earlier. Unlike Madeleine, Emily recognized a pattern. Having grown up with the legend, she immediately relocated to her parents' home in Bordeaux, where the nightmares ceased. Upon her return 3 months later, she reported no recurrence of the dreams, though she maintains a strict practice of never staying near the property after dark. When interviewed for a documentary in 2020, Emily offered perspective that bridges the gap between rational explanation and supernatural possibility. I don't know if what happened to Madeleine Durand was madness or something more, but I know what I experienced was real. The dreams, the voice, the absolute conviction that my children were in danger. Whatever it was, it affected my mind in ways I cannot explain. And it stopped when I left this place. The ruins of the Durand home stand today as they have for nearly 2 centuries, a crumbling monument to a tragedy that defies simple explanation. The stone walls, blackened by the inexplicable fire of 1887, seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. Vegetation grows thickly everywhere except in the footprint of what was once the nursery, where nothing has taken root since the original events. As darkness falls on December 31st each year, residents of Clermont-Ferrand still observe an unwritten custom. Candles are placed in windows facing away from the hillside, creating a barrier of light between their homes and the ruins. Children are kept indoors, doors are locked, and many families maintain an all-night vigil until first light of the new year breaks over the eastern horizon. For in this small corner of rural France, the boundary between past and present, between nightmare and reality, remains perilously thin. The legacy of Madeleine Durand, her dreams, her desperate act of love and madness, and whatever force might have driven her to it, continues to reach across the centuries, whispering to those who listen, better now quickly than suffering later. What happened to the Durand family in that isolated house in the winter of 1850 stands as one of history's most disturbing cases of maternal madness, or perhaps something beyond madness entirely. A mother's nightmares that became reality, a father's desperate attempts to protect his children, 3 innocent lives taken out of love and terrible conviction, and a legacy of darkness that continues to echo through time. The story of Madeleine Durand forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of reality itself. Was she simply suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, or was she genuinely receiving premonitions from some unknown source? The evidence, even after nearly 2 centuries, remains frustratingly inconclusive. Perhaps most unnerving is the cyclical recurrence of similar phenomena in the region, as if whatever affected Madeleine continues to reach out to others, particularly vulnerable new mothers. This pattern suggests that whatever happened in that stone house was not an isolated incident, but the first manifestation of something that remains active to this day. The Durand case reminds us of the fragile boundary between love and madness, how the deepest maternal instinct to protect can transform into its terrible opposite. It speaks to our primal fears about the vulnerability of children and the lengths to which a parent might go to spare them from perceived suffering. If you found this exploration compelling, please help us continue bringing these forgotten historical cases to light. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that defy conventional explanation, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe happened to Madeline Durand? Until next time, remember that history's darkest corners often contain its most profound mysteries, and that sometimes the line between nightmare and reality is thinner than we dare admit. Better now, quickly, than suffering later. The whisper that drove a mother to murder continues to echo across time, reminding us that some questions are better left unanswered, and some ruins better left undisturbed.